Hi everybody, welcome to SOAS. I am Ida Hajvayanis, and I'm the chair of the Center for African Studies at SOAS. I'm a senior lecturer in Swahili here at SOAS. I'm really excited to have you guys here. So just very, very quickly about the Center for African Studies. It was founded in 1965. So immediately after the independence of quite a number of African states. But then since 1991, it's really sort of like assumed this role or responsibility of coordinating, stimulating, and promoting research and discussions about Africa on Africa from London. And this really targets our SOAS students, but also the community at large. Today, we're going to explore, to understand the aspirations and the concerns, the attitudes of the youth. Welcome once again. Nico, thank you.
Thank you very much, Ida. It's a great pleasure to be here at SOAS, to be here with Africa's future generation. I'm going to start with the easy part, which is to play a video.
Since 2019, an African philanthropic foundation has been interviewing thousands of young people across the continent.
By 2030, Africans will make up 42% of the world's young people, so their young people need to be listened to.
As the fastest growing demographic globally, African youth are the ones to watch. How will they shape their countries, influence the continent, and make their mark on the global stage? Now, in its third iteration, the African Youth Survey is the most comprehensive research into Africa's youth. It provides an in-depth look at the perspectives, sentiments, and intentions of young people across the continent on critical social, political, and environmental issues. Since its inception in 2020, researchers have gauged the sentiments of more than 14,000 respondents through face-to-face interviews across 25 countries, covering 80 African cities and rural centers. For this edition, 5,604 youths were interviewed in 16 countries. Despite the significant economic challenges they face, African youth remain hopeful and ambitious. Attitudes about the overall direction of the continent and their countries remain negative, but there are small improvements following dips during COVID. There is a sense that the youth still believe that things can be turned around. Corruption is the single greatest hurdle they face to achieve their own potential, and there is support for a range of policies to address it, including police task forces, tougher penalties, and banning those convicted of corruption from standing for public office. Almost 60% are looking to emigrate in the next 5 years, with North America being the top destination of choice, followed by Western Europe. Although the majority still believe in democracy, many are turning away from the Western concept of democracy in favor of an African-infused system that will deliver the results they desire. More alarmingly, nearly 1 in 3 believe that non-democratic systems could be preferable under certain circumstances. The majority of African youth do remain skeptical of foreign influence for fear of exploitation of their country's natural resources. Youth continue to identify China and the United States as the two most influential foreign powers in the region. An increasing proportion view the impact of Russia's influence in their country negatively. The survey explored the impact of the Ukraine-Russia war on the continent, revealing that a majority of youth blames Western powers for the conflict. 3/4 are concerned about climate change, and 4 in 5 say their government needs to be doing more to address it.
If there ever was a wake-up call to the West to say, invest in Africa, help create jobs, help keep Africans in Africa, it's now.
One of the things that stand out for me from that video is the statement from the IMF that say that in the next 10 years, by 2035, there'll be more young Africans entering the global workforce than anywhere else in the world combined. And I think that it's one of the key reasons why the Ichikowitz Family Foundation decided to focus on youth and decided to invest in an African Youth Survey. And it's critical for us to understand, their aspirations, their hopes, their fears and dreams for the future. One of the key things that we identified in the 2020 survey was that there were quite high levels of Afro-optimism among young people. They were optimistic about the future, that they have the ability to shape their own future, that they feel that in the next few years their financial position will improve, and that they also know what they want to do in their future life. We've asked young people, if they look back at the last 5 years, what are the biggest impacts they think were on the African continent. And from 2020, when we started the survey, death from infectious diseases has always been the top issue that they identified as the most important event over the last 5 years. COVID had a big impact. In 2022, we asked young people, and 40% of them indicated that they had to stop their education or their schooling. Nearly another 20% say that they lost their jobs as a result of COVID. So COVID really had a big impact. Last year, we have seen uptick again in young people saying that the continent is moving in the right direction. And that is encouraging because we see some green shoots of optimism again. Then we ask young people to look into the future and tell us, what do you think are the key priorities, for Africa to progress? Reducing government corruption is the top issue. It was the top issue in 2020. In 2022, creating new well-paying jobs was the top issue. And last year, it was back to addressing corruption. Corruption is really a big issue across the board. Corruption impacts young people in terms of starting a new business. It impacts them on finding a job. It also drives them to look for better opportunities abroad. We want to explore young people's perceptions about foreign powers on the continent. So interesting, if you ask a general question to young people about foreign influence, then they're all very concerned about it. But if you then ask them about individual countries, then you'll see that actually they're fairly positive about all the individual countries. If you look at the US, for instance, in the green, they believe they have a 70% influence in their country, and that influence is 79% positive. And the US started very positive in 2020, but has certainly declined over time. And then China overtaken the US. So China is, at the moment, the top influencer. China is also the top positive influencer on the continent. So young people believe China's influence is positive. Democratic ambitions of young people, this is very interesting, and I think a lot of other people do research on this topic. There is an alarming increase in the number of young people that say, in certain circumstances, a non-democratic system could be preferable. They're looking for a different system than just a system that copies a Western-style democracy, and they're looking for more of an African-style democracy.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Nico. I often believe that when you have a captive audience, you don't waste it. And so one of the first things that I wanted to ask you is to tell us a little bit about the Family Foundation, why it was set up, and why this has become one of your premier investments in relation to some of the work that you do.
So I'm one of the privileged few who's worked all my life in Africa, having lived through the transformation process in South Africa and actually experienced the art of the possible. I carry a very rare commodity on my shoulder, which is insatiable Afro-optimism. I have seen the impossible happen again and again and again, and I'm one of the few people who've probably seen the best and the worst of what the democratic experiment has done to the continent. I realized that the future of this continent was going to be driven by engaging with the reality of what was going on in the ground. And the foundation was effectively set up to go and identify challenges that we could help to fix. I've always said that 2025 was going to be the point at which the fortunes of Africa turned, 2024, because the new generation of voters who didn't have the monkey of apartheid or the monkey of colonialism sitting on their shoulders, that sees the potential, not the challenges.
So how do you reconcile your Afro-optimism with what we're hearing in the survey data in relation to young people increasingly feeling buoyed by regimes that are emerging in the Sahel, for instance?
My optimism is driven not by the small increments between 2023 and 2024. It's driven by what we're seeing as a trend since we started this process. What this data is telling us is that entrepreneurship is about getting stuff done. We have the capacity to go and do the stuff for ourselves.
Matteo, this is an area of research for you. Would you like to build on this?
Yeah, thank you. Must be frank, I don't share the Afro-optimism of my co-panelists. Please put your hands up if you think that this youth will succeed in fulfilling their dream to migrate to the north. Nobody. So they are stuck in Africa. Most of them will be stuck in Africa because the tightening of the screw on against immigration is the fact we are dealing today. And I think I found this chapter of the report saying changing the mindset of African young people from job seeker to job creators deeply problematic, because the problem is that this is desperate entrepreneurship. The fact that due to the lack of jobs, people need to take matters into their hands and try to start businesses in utterly dysfunctional markets. How do we create systems that, like everywhere else in the wealthy part of the world, employment is the norm and self-employment is more the exception? So I think, this is the pressing development challenge. And I think part of the space to create that challenge is to debunk the myth that youth will be entrepreneurs in large numbers.
I'm going to come to you, Mikhail. I know, Eva, you want to respond.
Yes,
absolutely.
Respond.
All right.
You asked me why we invest in the survey. Mm-hmm. You're the reason we invest in the survey. Because the traditional view of Africa has always been that we're a hopeless case. I'm not looking backwards. Everything you've said is completely correct if we were looking at 10 years ago. My optimism comes from the fact that this generation of leaders, the next generation of leaders, is not going to put up with this nonsense. They are not going to sit and allow themselves to be victimized by inefficient governments.
I do think you're actually saying the same thing, which is around Let me clarify the points of convergence. The points of convergence is that you have a population of young people who are being forced into a specific direction, sure, which they do not think is an option. That's your point. And the optimism of the youth in countries such as Kenya, Uganda, whether they're exercising that optimism by pushing back against their governments, is that they want the right conditions for work. That is not about starting a business, but creating the right conditions for them to explore the kinds of opportunities that they want. I want to invite Mikhail. What is your own work in relation to the diaspora, Africans, and conversations in relation to optimism, or where we need to push our governments? What is it saying as you connect it to the survey report?
Thank you for the question. My work looks specifically at diaspora and second generation. And I was there to look at why relocation was something that they considered. But the reality is a bit more mixed. It's not linear. Those who are sending remittances, they do so because they have no choice, right? So their family depend on them, their communities depend on them. It's not as a way to invest, as a livelihood. Then there are those who are able to relocate and build businesses and want to contribute. And they're a lot more excited about the opportunities of the continent, thinking in the future, so more aligned with your Afro-optimism. But that is not necessarily unproblematic as an approach, because as much as people maybe have positive or good intention in the work that they do, there are also other unwanted results from their presence in those spaces. I think there is definitely an opportunity for the diaspora to play a role, but not without a reflection of their own positionalities and how they may impact those contexts.
Instead of just sending remittances, if we can get to a point where the diaspora starts understanding this generational change, and the diaspora starts investing in their own countries, then the developed investment community will start following.
Let's not romanticize and create this idea that we need to wake up. The diaspora is very active, has been pumping billions of dollars in Africa, but without the right government incentives, is doing it in ways that is very difficult to call developmental. No country has ever developed without a strong developmental government, ever.
How do you get a strong developmental government?
Certainly by not slashing wages, having per diems, so that your government officers only goes to the meeting where the per diem is solid enough. Certainly not what we are doing right now.
Okay. Now, strong conversation here. I want to open up for comments and questions. And I'm really, in opening up, inviting you to raise both questions, but also to offer some ideas of how you think some of the conversations that we've been having here could be channeled into sort of some positive outcomes or solutions or ways of working.
This survey points to the fact that most African youth are probably not happy with their own government. How do you mobilize this into forcing governments to start playing cleanly?
We're having a youth that is well informed, who are, desiring and hungry for good leadership, and they know what ought to be done. And I think it's a good example for all of us.
The burden is placed on the individual to change the system. How exactly are you spinning that around? That we go and talk to the governments to change their mindset.
This is a report that must be discussed maybe in every of those countries that you did research, so that governments own this research.
What would you say about this survey that is beneficial to a militaristic view?
I'm going to try and answer everything as quickly as I possibly can without referring to each question. First of all, why am I doing this? I was in a team in the information department in the African National Congress that wrote a slogan that said, "Vote ANC. We will give you a house, we will give you a job, and we will ensure your prosperity." We had an entire generation of people who believed that that was going to be the salvation for the continent. That generation, sadly, was very disappointed. We have a new generation emerging that isn't waiting for somebody else to give them their prosperity. And I think that in the context of that, there is a generation of human capital, our biggest and most valuable resource, that is prepared to go and create the reality they want. We fought very hard for the democracies that the world wants to see in Africa. If we as Africans can't defend those democracies, then we have failed, which then leads to the foreign influence issue. Until we create our ability to be independent in everything, including defending ourselves, we haven't achieved our objectives as Africans. I do invest in Africa. I have invested billions of dollars in Africa. And my biggest frustration is it's very difficult for me to get foreign organizations to invest with me, to invest behind me, because the narrative that they hear is a perception based on the past, not the reality of what we see into the future. Now, nobody can talk nonsense anymore. We've got data. We can measure what's working and what isn't working. And all we need to do is we need to engage with the governments that want to fix the problems.
So let me just offer some 3 closing remarks. As a Kenyan and as an African, that I'm very optimistic about Africa. And that optimism is rooted in realism. Either when you've argued consistently that this generation is not willing to sit on the backside, neither did my generation. Neither did the generation of my parents before me. I think there's a certain kind of animation that's coming across now, across various parts of the continent. But I think we must be careful that this generation of activists, this generation of young people, do not forget the lessons of previous liberation leaders and previous activists who went through these very journeys that allow us to be able to have these conversations. Ivor, Nico, I hope that this has been a robust enough conversation for you in relation to this survey report.
Thank you so much, everybody, for this discussion.